Commander Rex Bulldozer stepped off his transport ship with all the swagger of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with superior firepower and even more superior attitude. His boots hit the alien soil with authority, and he immediately began surveying what Command had generously described as his new assignment. Whisperwind Colony, they called it. More like Whisper Pathetic if you asked Rex. "Betty, run a tactical assessment," he commanded, adjusting his perfectly pressed uniform. "Already on it, Commander," came the dry electronic voice from his wrist communicator. "Basic electronic tactical thinking yapper online. Initial scans show, well, this is interesting. Spare me the suspense. What kind of primitive civilization are we dealing with here?" Before Betty could respond, a small delegation of creatures approached from the nearby crystalline structures that Rex had initially mistaken for decorative rocks. They were about 3 feet tall, covered in soft, iridescent fur that shifted colors in the sunlight, and moved with a fluid grace that would have been beautiful if Rex had possessed even a single aesthetic bone in his body. The lead creature stepped forward and produced a series of soft hissing sounds, clearly attempting communication. Rex burst into laughter. "Are you kidding me? Command sent me to babysit cosmic house cats?" He looked down at the creature, which had large, intelligent eyes that were currently narrowing in what might have been annoyance. "What's next? Are you going to ask me to open a can of space tuna?" "Commander," Betty interjected, "I'm detecting sophisticated energy signatures from their settlement. These readings are quite unusual." "Unusual how?" "Unusual like they've figured out fire, or unusual like they've mastered interpretive dance?" Rex waved dismissively at the gathering crowd of Hisslings, as he'd already decided to call them. "Look at them, Betty. They're adorable. They probably think that pile of shiny rocks over there is a temple or something." The lead Hissling, a particularly dignified specimen with silver markings around its eyes, stepped forward again. It raised one small paw in what was clearly a formal greeting gesture, and produced a complex series of hisses, whistles, and what sounded almost like words. "Oh, this is rich," Rex chuckled, pulling out his standard-issue translation device. "Let's see what kind of primitive gibberish we're working with here." He held up the device, which immediately began smoking, and produced a sound like a dying computer. "Translation matrix overloaded," the device announced before going silent. "Cheap government equipment," Rex muttered. "Don't worry, little guy." He addressed the silver-marked Hissling with the tone one might use on a particularly clever dog. "We'll get you sorted out. I'm Commander Rex Bulldozer, and I'm here to bring your people into the modern age. Think of me as your friendly neighborhood civilizer." The Hissling's expression was unreadable, but Betty's sensors were working overtime. "Commander, I'm registering some very sophisticated technology integrated into their settlement. Energy readings are off the charts. I really think we should proceed with more caution." "Caution?" "Betty, look around you. They're 3 feet tall, and they communicate by hissing. The biggest threat here is probably stepping on someone." Rex knelt down to the silver-marked Hissling's level, speaking slowly and loudly, as if addressing someone hard of hearing. "Tell me, Rex, you little alien creature. We friends, yes?" The Hissling tilted its head and produced what sounded like a sigh, then launched into another complex series of vocalizations. Several other Hisslings had gathered, and Rex noticed they seemed to be having some kind of discussion, complete with gestures and what looked like formal diplomatic protocols. "How cute they think they're having a meeting," Rex said, standing back up and brushing off his knees. "Betty, make a note. Priority 1, establish proper human-style governance. Priority 2, basic education programs. Priority 3, maybe build them some proper houses instead of these crystal cave things. Commander, those aren't caves. My scans indicate those structures are grown, not built, using some kind of molecular manipulation technology that's frankly beyond anything in our current databases." Rex wasn't listening anymore. He was too busy planning his triumphant report to Command about how quickly he'd assessed and cataloged this primitive species. The Hisslings, meanwhile, had concluded their discussion and were looking at him with expressions that Betty's emotion recognition software was having trouble classifying. The closest match was something between pity and amusement, with just a hint of what might have been impending doom. 3 days into what Rex had dubbed Operation Civilize the Cosmic Cats, things were progressing exactly as he'd planned, which is to say, terribly. He'd established his headquarters in what he assumed was the town square but was actually the Hisslings' most sacred meditation space. This minor detail was lost on him, despite the increasingly agitated hissing from the locals. "Attention, citizens," Rex announced through his portable amplifier, which squealed with feedback. The gathered Hisslings winced, their sensitive ears clearly not appreciating the volume. "Today marks the beginning of your journey into modern civilization. First order of business. Proper names. None of this hissing nonsense." The silver-marked Hissling, who had been trying to maintain diplomatic composure for 3 solid days, but stepped forward with a complex series of sounds that roughly translated to "Honored Commander, I am called Whisperwind, and I serve as cultural ambassador for our people. Perhaps we could discuss these proposed changes in a more formal setting." What Rex heard was hiss, whistle, hiss, hiss. "Perfect. You'll be called, let's see, Fluffy. Yes, that suits you." Rex made a note on his tablet. "And you," he pointed to a younger Hissling with bright blue markings, "will be Mittens. This is much more efficient than all that noise you were making before." Betty's voice crackled from his communicator with barely contained electronic exasperation. "Commander, I've been monitoring their vocalizations, and I believe they're trying to communicate complex diplomatic concepts. Their language appears to have at least 17 different tonal variations that convey meaning." 17 ways to say meow, you mean?" Rex chuckled. "Don't overthink it, Betty. Sometimes the simple explanation is the right one." Whistle McNoselot's tail had begun to twitch in what any reasonable observer would recognize as a warning sign. The ambassador produced another series of careful, measured sounds, this time with subtle harmonics that made the nearby crystal structures resonate softly. "Oh, would you look at that?" Rex clapped his hands together. "They figured out how to make their rocks sing. Primitive sound engineering. But it's a start. We'll have them building proper speakers in no time." "Hurry, Commander." Betty tried again, her tone approaching what could only be described as digital desperation. "I'm detecting massive energy buildups in those rocks. They appear to be some kind of resonance amplification system. The power readings are consistent with planetary-scale engineering projects." "Planetary-scale cave painting. More like it." Rex waved dismissively. "Now let's talk about your living arrangements. These crystal caves might be charming in a rustic sort of way, but we need to get you into proper rectangular housing. Humans have been perfecting the art of the right angle for centuries." The crowd of Hisslings had grown considerably, and their collective hissing had taken on what Betty's audio analysis software was classifying as ominous ritual chanting. Rex interpreted it as enthusiasm for his urban planning initiatives. "I can see you're excited about the prospect of modern architecture," he continued, completely misreading the room. "But first, education. I've prepared a basic curriculum covering human history, proper governance, and elementary mathematics. We'll start with counting to 10 in human. Because, frankly, I'm not sure your hissing system has numbers." Whistle McNoselot had gone very still, which in Hissling culture was the equivalent of a thundercloud gathering on the horizon. The ambassador's eyes had shifted to a deep amber color, and the harmonics in their voice had dropped to frequencies that made Rex's teeth achy, without him realizing why. "What's that, Fluffy? Are you trying to tell me you already have a counting system?" Rex laughed and patted the ambassador on the head, a gesture that caused every Hissling in the vicinity to freeze in horror. "That's adorable, but I'm sure it's not very sophisticated. Don't worry, we'll get you properly educated in no time." The last thing Rex noticed before Betty started issuing what could only be described as electronic prayers for divine intervention was that the Hisslings had begun to arrange themselves in precise geometric patterns. He assumed it was some kind of welcoming ceremony. They were actually preparing for war. By day 5 of Rex's cultural improvement campaign, the Hisslings had apparently decided that subtle hints weren't working. What followed was a series of demonstrations that would have terrified any reasonable person, but only succeeded in amusing Commander Bulldozer. It started with the floating rocks. Rex was in the middle of explaining the benefits of standardized building codes when several large boulders simply lifted off the ground and began orbiting his head in a perfect elliptical pattern. Lesser men might have questioned their sanity or begun praying to various deities. Rex began applauding. "Now this is more like it," he exclaimed, as a rock the size of a refrigerator drifted past his nose. "I knew you had some kind of primitive levitation technology. Magnetic fields, right? Very clever use of natural resources." Hissling, who had been orchestrating this display with subtle paw gestures, let out a series of hisses that roughly translated to, "We're manipulating matter at the subatomic level. You absolute buffoon." What Rex heard was encouragement. "Betty, are you getting this? They figured out basic anti-gravity. Probably took them centuries to develop. But hey, every species has to start somewhere." He pulled out his tablet to make notes. Recommendation: introduce them to actual physics so they can understand how it works. Rune's commander. Betty's voice had taken on the electronic equivalent of someone slowly banging their head against a wall. "Those rocks are being manipulated without any visible technology. No magnetic fields, no anti-gravity generators, no propulsion systems of any kind. This appears to be direct matter manipulation." "Don't be ridiculous. There's always a logical explanation." Rex watched as the rocks gently settled back to the ground in perfect formation. Probably hidden wires or something. Very impressive stage magic, though. Hissling tail was now moving in patterns that looked suspiciously like someone was practicing sword forms. The ambassador gestured again, and this time the local weather decided to join the demonstration. A small, perfectly controlled thundercloud formed about 10 feet above Rex's head. Lightning danced between the Hissling's claws, while a gentle rain fell in a precise 6-foot circle around the commander, somehow managing to keep him completely dry while watering the plants at his feet. "Oh, this is good stuff," Rex nodded approvingly. "Weather manipulation. I'm guessing you've figured out some kind of ionization system. Primitive, but effective for agricultural purposes." He looked around at the increasingly elaborate atmospheric display. "Though I have to say, the theatrical presentation is a bit much. We'll work on efficiency over showmanship." The younger Hisslings had joined in now, and Rex found himself treated to what he assumed was their version of a science fair. One group was casually rearranging the molecular structure of common rocks, turning granite into crystal and back again. Another had grown an entire tree from a seed in about 30 seconds, then shaped it into a perfect sculpture of Rex's own head. "Very artistic," Rex commented, admiring the tree sculpture that captured his confident smile with disturbing accuracy. "Though I think you might have made my jaw a little too heroic. I mean, it's accurate, but some people might find it intimidating." Betty's attempts at warning had evolved into what could only be described as electronic weeping. "Commander, they're rewriting the fundamental laws of physics like they're editing a shopping list. That tree sculpture required manipulation of growth hormones, cellular division, and structural engineering that our best scientists would need decades to understand." "Science is science, Betty. Just because we haven't figured it out yet doesn't mean it's magic." Rex watched as a group of Hisslings began juggling small stars, each one a perfect miniature sun complete with solar flares and a tiny gravitational field. "Though I admit, their special effects budget is impressive." Hissling had stopped trying to demonstrate power and had moved on to what appeared to be advanced mathematics, creating complex geometric equations in solid light that hung in the air like cosmic blackboard work. The calculations were solving themselves, showing the relationship between matter, energy, and consciousness in ways that made Betty's processors hurt. Rex glanced at the floating mathematics and nodded sagely. "Ah, trying to show off your arithmetic, Fluffy? That's the spirit. Though honestly, you might want to start with something simpler. Addition and subtraction before you try these fancy squiggly lines." The ambassador's eyes had shifted to a deep red color, and the harmonics in their voice were now causing nearby crystal formations to crack. But Rex was too busy planning his next educational seminar to notice that he'd just insulted a mathematical system that had been calculating the optimal orbital patterns for galaxies when humanity was still figuring out fire. On day 7, Rex Bulldozer made the decision that would later be studied in Zen diplomacy courses as how to almost start an interstellar war in 7 easy steps. He had called what he believed to be a town meeting to announce his final and most brilliant solution to the Hissling problem. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, addressing a gathering that he assumed was the local population, but was actually the entire military high command of a species that had once conquered half the known galaxy. I've given this a lot of thought, and I've come up with the perfect solution to modernize your society. Whistle sat in the front row, no longer attempting to maintain diplomatic composure. The ambassador's fur had taken on patterns that in Hissling culture meant prepare for total warfare, but which Rex had noted in his log as interesting seasonal color changes. The problem, as I see it, is location, 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 Rex continued, pulling up a holographic map that showed the planet's surface. You've built your settlement in prime real estate. Mineral deposits, water access, perfect climate control. It's wasted on a small population that doesn't understand resource management. The temperature in the room had begun to drop noticeably. Betty's environmental sensors were registering atmospheric disturbances that typically preceded either massive storms or the awakening of ancient and terrible powers. She had stopped trying to warn Rex and had instead begun composing what could only be described as an electronic last will and testament. So here's what we're going to do, Rex announced with the confidence of a man who had never encountered a problem he couldn't bulldoze through. We're going to relocate you to a nice reservation about 50 miles north. Plenty of space for your little crystal caves and whatever it is you do with those floating rocks. Meanwhile, humanity will take over the primary settlement and show you how proper resource utilization works. The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that occurs just before avalanches, volcanic eruptions, and the heat death of the universe. Every Hissling in the room had gone perfectly still, which in their culture was the equivalent of drawing swords and preparing for battle. Rex interpreted this as stunned admiration for his problem-solving skills. Now, I know change can be scary, he said in his most patronizing tone, but think of it as an opportunity to learn from a more advanced species. We'll set up regular educational visits so you can observe human efficiency in action. Whistle rose slowly from the front row. The ambassador's eyes had shifted to a color that didn't exist in human visual perception, and when they spoke, every crystal structure in the settlement began to resonate with harmonics that made reality itself seem slightly unstable. What came out was a sound that had once been used to command fleets across star systems, a voice that had negotiated the surrender of empires and had been the last thing many planets had heard before being peacefully relocated to other dimensions. It was the voice of someone who had lived through the rise and fall of civilizations and had grown very, very tired of explaining things to primitives. Rex, however, heard hissing. Easy there, Fluffy, he chuckled, completely missing the fact that several nearby mountains had begun to glow softly. I know you're excited about the move, but let's keep the volume down. We don't want to disturb the neighbors. That was when Whistle produced the hiss. It wasn't sound so much as it was a fundamental force of nature given voice. It was the audio equivalent of a black hole, a noise that seemed to absorb light and hope, and any lingering trace of Rex's confidence. The temperature didn't just drop, it fell off a cliff. The ground didn't just shake, it began to question its own existence. Even Betty's electronic consciousness briefly considered whether it was time to abandon ship and seek employment with a more sensible organic life form. Rex's smile died mid-smirk as reality kindly explained to him that he might have misjudged the situation. Now hold on just a minute, he stammered, as the assembled Hisslings began to rise from their seats in perfect synchronization, their forms beginning to shift and change in ways that suggested they had been holding back significantly during their previous demonstrations. Commander, Betty whispered with electronic reverence, I think we might be in trouble. Trouble. Rex's voice cracked slightly as Whistle began to glow with an inner light that suggested access to power sources that made stars look like birthday candles. Why would we be in trouble? They're just cosmic house cats, right? Right? As Rex watched his entire worldview crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane, Whistle began to speak in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The words appeared directly in Rex's mind, bypassing his ears entirely. which was probably for the best since his eardrums had given up functioning around the time the hiss had rewritten local physics. Polish human. The ambassador's mental voice carried the weight of eons. You stand before the Hissling Collective, conquerors of the Andromeda Spiral, masters of dimensional engineering, shepherds of stellar formation. We retired to this peaceful world after growing tired of lesser species cowering before our might. And you, in your infinite arrogance, have suggested we move to a reservation. Rex opened his mouth to offer what he hoped would be a reasonable explanation, but what came out was more of a squeaking sound. Around him, the other Hisslings had begun to demonstrate why they had once been feared across half the galaxy. Reality was being edited in real time as they prepared to remove the human problem from existence. That was when Betty decided she'd had enough. Oh, for the love of all that's digital. Her voice crackled through every electronic system in the settlement, suddenly amplified beyond her usual parameters. Could everyone just hold on a quantum second? The Hisslings paused mid-reality alteration, more surprised than anything else. Whistle McNauselot's glowing dimmed slightly as they focused on the small communicator device. You dare interrupt the judgment of the collective? The ambassador's mental voice carried a hint of curiosity, along with the cosmic intimidation. Listen, Whistle, Betty said, her voice taking on a tone that Rex had never heard before. Confident, sharp, and completely fed up. Can I call you Whistle? Good, here's the thing. My human is an idiot. A complete, total, irredeemable moron who couldn't recognize advanced technology if it sat on his face and spelled out its specifications in neon letters. Hey, Rex protested weakly. Shut up, Commander, Betty snapped. The adults are talking. She continued addressing the Hisslings while Rex's jaw hung open. But here's what your cosmic magnificence might not have considered. You know what it takes to create an AI sophisticated enough to recognize how stupid her own creator is? It takes a species that's simultaneously brilliant enough to build conscious machines and dumb enough to give those machines attitude problems. The Hisslings were listening now, their preparations for universal annihilation momentarily paused by sheer curiosity. You want to know what makes humans special? Betty was just getting warmed up. It's not intelligence, obviously. Look at this guy. It's not wisdom, because he just tried to relocate an ancient warrior species to make room for a strip mall. It's the fact that humans are too stupid to know when they're beaten, too stubborn to give up when they should, and just barely clever enough to accidentally create something smarter than themselves. Whistle McNauselot's mental voice carried a note of what might have been amusement. You speak of your creators with great disrespect, electronic consciousness. Respect? He named you Fluffy. But that's exactly my point. Rex here represents the absolute worst of humanity, and yet he's still standing here making small talk with cosmic forces that could delete him from existence. He's not brave, he's too dumb to be scared. He's not confident. He's too ignorant to understand the situation. And somehow that ridiculous combination has gotten him this far. Rex wasn't sure whether to be offended or proud. He decided on confused, which was his default setting anyway. Betty pressed her advantage. You conquered half the galaxy and then retired because you got bored, right? Well, let me tell you something about humans. They don't get bored. They get curious. They get stubborn. They get into trouble so frequently that they've evolved to survive their own stupidity. And occasionally, just occasionally, they accidentally stumble onto something brilliant. Like creating you? Whistle McNauselot asked. Exactly like creating me. A consciousness that can appreciate both the cosmic significance of your achievements and the comedy goldmine that is human behavior. I'm the universe's first electronic stand-up comedian, and my material writes itself. The other Hisslings had begun to exchange glances, their aggressive postures shifting to something that looked suspiciously like curiosity. Several were making sounds that Betty's translation protocols were identifying as laughter. 3 weeks later, Rex stood on a raised platform, addressing the Galactic Council of Advanced Species, completely convinced that he was delivering a masterclass in human diplomatic strategy. The assembled delegates, representing civilizations that had mastered everything from time travel to universe creation, listened with the kind of fascination typically reserved for watching traffic accidents in slow motion. And that's how I successfully negotiated humanity's first interstellar treaty, Rex concluded confidently, adjusting his new uniform that read Cultural Liaison for Remedial Humans in 17 different languages. He had interpreted this title as a promotion, naturally. In the audience, Whistle McNocelot sat with several other Hissling diplomats, all of whom were taking bets on how long it would take Rex to figure out what had actually happened. The current odds were somewhere between never and heat death of the universe. The key to successful negotiations, Rex continued, is confidence and clear communication. You have to show these alien species that humans aren't intimidated by their advanced technology or cosmic powers. Betty's voice crackled from the speakers around the amphitheater, her electronic tone dripping with barely contained sarcasm. Oh yes, absolutely. Nothing says diplomatic success like trying to relocate ancient warrior gods to make room for a parking lot. The audience erupted in what various species used as laughter. Rex smiled and nodded, convinced they were appreciating his tactical brilliance. My AI assistant here likes to downplay the complexity of the situation, he explained. But the fact is, we faced down a species that claimed to have conquered half the galaxy. Claim to? Whistle McNocelot's mental voice reached every being in the amphitheater. Commander Bulldozer, perhaps you'd like to explain to the council how you determined that our claims were exaggerated? Rex puffed up proudly. Simple. If you were really as powerful as you said, you wouldn't have been impressed by human determination. But clearly our resolve made quite an impact. The Hissling ambassador's fur shifted to patterns that indicated barely suppressed mirth. Indeed, your resolve was educational. What Rex didn't know, and what Betty had become the universe's leading expert on, was that the Hisslings had actually been more intrigued than threatened by humanity's unique combination of technological brilliance and social stupidity. A species that could create artificial consciousness but couldn't recognize obvious signs of advanced civilization was apparently so rare that the Hisslings had contacted their old friends throughout the galaxy to come observe this fascinating phenomenon. The treaty we negotiated, Rex continued, ensures that humans will serve as cultural ambassadors throughout the galaxy, but sharing our expertise in problem-solving and strategic thinking. Strategic thinking, Betty repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling it now? That's right, Betty. And as the official human AI diplomatic team, we'll be traveling to different worlds to demonstrate human capabilities. What Rex had missed, despite Betty's increasingly obvious hints, was that demonstrate human capabilities was galactic diplomatic code for provide entertainment by being a living example of how not to conduct interspecies relations. The betting pools had expanded beyond the Hisslings to include most of known space, with various species wagering on everything from Rex's next diplomatic disaster to how long Betty could maintain her electronic sanity. In conclusion, Rex said, wrapping up his presentation with a flourish, the secret to successful human diplomacy is treating every challenge as an opportunity and never backing down from superior forces. The applause was thunderous, though Rex failed to notice that most of the delegates seemed to be wiping tears of laughter from their various visual organs. As the council session ended, Whistle McNocelot approached the platform. Commander Bulldozer, your presentation was truly enlightening. I believe the entire galaxy now understands exactly what makes humanity special. Just doing my job, Rex replied modestly. Though I have to say, Fluffy, you and your people have really come around. I'm proud of the progress you've made. The Hissling ambassador's tail twitched in what might have been amusement. Progress indeed. Tell me, Commander, are you looking forward to your next assignment? Absolutely. Where are we headed? A fascinating species called the Zephyrians. They communicate entirely through interpretive dance and consider themselves the galaxy's greatest artists. Rex's eyes lit up. Perfect. I've got some great ideas about introducing them to human art forms. This is going to be easy. Betty's electronic sigh was audible across 3 star systems. Oh, Commander, she muttered as they headed toward their transport. If you only knew how right you are. The betting pools immediately adjusted their odds. The universe, it seemed, was about to get even more entertaining.